Death is the unyielding truth that binds us all, an inevitable, profound, and deeply intimate encounter with the finite nature of life. It arrives without warning, shattering the world we thought we knew. In its wake, grief emerges, often dismissed as something to fix or get over. But what if grief, in its suffocating pain, is not a burden to carry or something from which we need to move on? What if grief is instead a sacred invitation, an opening to feel more deeply, to connect in unimaginable ways, and to transform all that we knew to be true? I'm Laura Walton, and I'm so grateful you're here. Together, let's step into the uncharted terrain of death and grief, not as something to fear or avoid, but as a force that shapes us, breaks us, and ultimately remakes us. Let's meet it not with resistance, but with curiosity and courage. And let's do this on purpose. We have another very special guest today, Miss Lauren Morse, coming to us from, where are you coming from again?
Yellow Springs, Ohio.
Yeah, from Ohio, where it's still cold. So thank you for being here, Lauren. Could you just start by sharing a little bit about how we became connected and how you became interested in and a part of this project?
Yeah, sure. I've been teaching yoga for over a decade. And then around 2018, I was interested in doing a death midwifery training through Earth Traditions. And Laura, it sounds like you did that training too. And so we still have kind of the same social network when it comes to events and things and general communications in that area. And one of our leads for that program had asked you to share some of the work you were doing. And it just perked my ears up because I was like, oh, yoga and grief. I've been working on this thing for about a decade now. So it just really piqued my interest through our mutual network there.
Yeah. So do you mind sharing a little bit more? What is it specifically about yoga and grief that is interesting to you?
Yeah, I think yoga is a regular practice in my life. It's daily practice in my life. And, part of what I enjoy about sharing the practice is the whole spectrum of yoga. And while I teach these classes and they're mainly physical fitness classes, there's this whole other aspect to it. And one of many limbs and aspects is being in touch with your body and being aware of your body and taking the time of day to just feel your feelings. And so yoga has helped immensely with grief in particular when it comes to where grief can show up physically in my body and where it had for a long time, and maybe before practicing yoga, not realizing that it was there physically as well. And so I've spent the last decade really honing in on not just the positive aspects of yoga for mental clarity and fitness and well-being, but also how can I use this tool in my toolkit to get through the rough stuff as well, or to live with the rough stuff better, right? And a lot of restorative and different types of somatic practices have helped to identify where that grief sits and how to move through that.
Yeah, so it sounds like for you, yoga has really been a huge tool in understanding and navigating your experiences with grief.
Absolutely. I think as a young adult, I was a former athlete. And so I didn't necessarily have a wonderful relationship with my body in relation to listening to my body. It was do what I need to do to perform. And if I perform well, then good, keep going. And so it wasn't until my mid-20s when real life happens to people, usually sometimes maybe earlier, that I started to run into kind of a disconnect with my body because I was no longer playing sports regularly and competitively. And then I was also trying to conceive for the first time when my husband and I started wanting to have children. And so it became this really volatile relationship with my body. And so yoga helped work through some grief in that with my physical body of, hey, I did everything I was supposed to do. Why is it not working for me anymore? Why is my body not doing what it said it was supposed to do? What it seems to do for everyone else.
Yeah.
And so yoga was a huge tool in when I wanted to dissociate and be angry with my body and just beat myself up internally and mentally. It remained in my toolkit, although I probably hadn't used it as often as I should at times, to reconnect and to remind myself that it's still doing its job and it's doing a good job of being my vehicle in this life, regardless of what I experience. And it's been integral in my daily life. Sure.
Okay. So I want to explore more just about what you do with yoga and what that practice looks like. But first, can you share a little bit about kind of what your life looks like right now, what kind of work you do, if that ties into the topic of yoga and grief, or if you do something maybe separate?
Yeah, I have a full-time job. I work as a research psychologist. I enjoy that work. And then my passion project, I have a friend that owns a yoga studio. And so that's where I began teaching yoga and practicing yoga. So I still support her in Yellow Springs. And I have two beautiful boys. They're 8 years old. And I started trying to conceive back in 2012 and found out that I had infertility. I had issues with being able to get pregnant. So I was still probably a good decade into my yoga practice, but it was a pretty standard practice. It was definitely more fitness focused and all of the good feelings that come with yoga. Let's go on retreat. Let's do these fun things. Let's connect with women. I hadn't really got into a lot of I guess it's called shadow work sometimes, of that type of stuff. And so when I started having issues with conceiving, I tried literally everything under the sun. Let's get baptized. Let's talk IVF. Let's do this. Let's go on retreat. Let's cleanse. Let's, anything, have this surgery, have this test. Let's do it all. Let's figure it out. And so that was what really led me into studying more somatic practices, more restorative, more gentle practices later on, because this period of about 5 years where I couldn't conceive is where I was probably in my darkest state, mentally, physically, emotionally. And while I was still helping others and still teaching yoga, I had such a disconnect with my body. I hated my body. Why is my body not getting pregnant? It should be a very natural function to be able to do. And so it wasn't until after several miscarriages and a failed IVF attempt that it was like a come to Jesus moment with myself, where I really started reading into a lot of traditional yoga scripture, really doing some shadow work. And one quote that is just ingrained in my brain forever until the day I die will be one of the sutras about fire is a path to purification and pain is a path to purification. And I don't typically think that everybody's pain and everybody's grief has to be this big productive thing. It can just be, it's allowed to be. But I felt compelled to do more with it. And so that's when I really started studying the somatics of grief, because I started having physical symptoms of not being able to get pregnant and the emotional strife and things like that. And the grief I started to feel with my miscarriages and my relationship with my womb and my belly in particular, I was having so many physical symptoms. And so I started studying Katona yoga in particular. And that really helped me, the theory, the practice of restorative postures and using props and a lot of somatics and a lot of body reading and mapping to really dive into, where do I feel this in my body? Where do I feel this emotion in my body? And really starting to listen to that and understand that this experience has to happen for me so that I can reconnect with a little bit with the gratitude of all the things my body has done and did for me, and also accept an outcome that I can't control. I'm a control freak. I've wanted to control every aspect of everything all the time. And this having infertility really took that out of my hands. And so being able to sit with the unknown, being able to sit with what I can control, that's a lot of basic yoga theory right outside of the physical practice. And so it was like, all right, put your money where your mouth is, sister. It's time to actually practice. Though my life has been relatively easy up until this point. And so I eventually was able to conceive through IVF. And my children I had twins. They came very early, a little bit before 30 weeks. And so we spent a lot of time in the NICU. And the first 2-3 years of their life, they're high risk, premature, and they're wonderful, healthy, wild boys now. But in that window of time from the 5 years of infertility, and then the 2 to 3 years of really not having any type of physical practice or focusing on myself, because I'm focused on their health and well-being fully, left me with almost a decade of, again, not really feeling in tune with my body and myself. And that was its own grief of where I felt that physically, the loss of what my old life looked like, the loss of what my body physically looked like. And so now that my kids are a little older, a little more self-sustaining, I'm really diving back into this work. How can I serve others through grief practices, how that shows up physically in the body, and help them work through and ride that wave of grief when it comes, and just so they feel more familiar with it. When you feel more familiar with something, you're less scared of it. Like the way we talk about grief and death and dying and those taboo topics. And so in a lot of my teachings and a lot of the privates I teach, people come to privates with me to work through more somatic restorative practices. And I don't even really advertise it as grief yoga, but I think when they get in that one-on-one scenario, there's a lot of it comes up. And so creating that container in that space and knowing that I've been there before, I've mapped my body well in all areas, not just the places I want to go, but the places I didn't want to go and had to. And I hope folks do that now too. Just the more you navigate something that you're unfamiliar with, you become familiar with. So just normalizing all that comes up through practicing that deep listening to your body. And when those uncomfortable and sad and life-changing events that cause those things in our body come up.
Yeah, I love that. That's such important work in whatever way that's done in helping people to sit with that discomfort. It sounds that then your work is primarily done through yoga classes and private one-on-one yoga sessions. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
Do you do public classes or is it all private?
I do public classes. Those are, again, geared to more your standard fitness-focused Western version of yoga. Sometimes I struggle with public classes. There's a time constraint. And what I don't want to do is be like, okay, you've got an hour, get all your emotions out now in a room full of people that you may know or not know. I feel like the one-on-one or even the small group container of, okay, we're advertising this as these are the things that we can get into, or teaching on retreats or things like that. Those are the spaces where I find it's a little more appropriate container to get into some of those topics of grief and sadness in the body, just because it helps people feel contained in a positive way, where they feel like they're in a safe and structured and caring environment, as opposed to some of the standard public fitness classes. I'm all for people coming to my class and we're in downward dog and doing crunches, and maybe they do start crying, but they need to get a release, and that's okay too. But yeah, primarily the one-on-one is where I do a lot of that deep somatic.
Yeah. So it sounded like what you're saying is oftentimes in the one-on-one sessions, somebody is maybe surprised by what comes up for them. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some have had a lot of clients come seeking some private sessions because they feel like they have a new ache or a new pain or a new thing that feels off. They say, hey, can we do a couple privates to work through this? I've got this shoulder thing. I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's get into it. And so I'll do a private practice. I have an acupuncture friend. I have a massage therapist friend. And so I recommend, hey, let you see these women too, work with them as well, and we'll get your shoulder feeling good. And when I talk to these folks, just in the exchange of working with them and putting hands on them and helping them get in poses, they're like, I'm recently divorced, or I've been caregiving for my mother consistently for 6 months now, and she just passed away last month in it. And then you start to relate all these life events and realize that they're so connected, right? And it's just this aha moment of, hey, do you think like your shoulders are like this and up to your ears all the time because you've been on edge caregiving for your mother, and now that you've started to release, you realize there's some chronic things going on here. And yeah, so people really do have those aha moments when they get to talking and connecting with their body at the same time.
I love that, because I know that to be true, that we hold those things in our bodies. And it's so cool. I imagine it's so cool to be a part of that connection being made. Somebody being like, oh, it's not just a bum shoulder. Maybe this is all of this history of like grief or traumas or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I like to, when I have those conversations with people too, and we identify those things, hey, what's working for you and what's not working for you? I like to talk about what works for people too, because I don't just want people to equate their injuries or their pain, emotional, visible, with their identity. It's definitely a part of them, but there are plenty of good parts of them too. And so when we go into this physical body reading and mapping and understanding before we go into a type of physical practice, I think it's important for them to know that we're naming the thing. We want to name the thing, but we don't have to be the thing forever.
Yeah.
And the thing does not control us. And we're identifying it and work and moving through the thing so that we can become familiar and live with it, not because it becomes our identity. I think I've seen some folks like that too, where their pain is so heavy and their grief is so heavy that they find it hard to see much else. And that can be a nice part of the practice too, is complimenting folks on what their abilities are can help with someone moves through some of that physical stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just one little piece, not the whole thing.
Yeah.
So people come to you pretty typically, it sounds like, for one-on-one because of some physical issue, some injury or physical concern.
A little bit. Yeah. Yellow Springs it's really small. We're a village. There's less than probably 3,000 people here. And so I do offer death midwife services, and that's pretty known in the village. And so I have offered group sessions on death cafes and grief support. I have friends who are credentialed counselors, and so I'll direct those folks to them as well. And so I think just by word of mouth at this point in the village, there's folks that know that for this type of work, a lot of times their therapist will recommend, hey, let's do some physical practice. And this person works in that realm of grief as well and how that presents in the body. So yeah, I would say but our town is really small and I don't have a lot of advertising. I don't even have a website anymore. But yeah, it's just, I try to be the village, just a village support. And there's a lot of that. Yeah, it's nice to live in a small town like this where there's a lot of very skilled women in a lot of different areas. And so, yeah, we're all always supportive of each other and promoting each other and finding ways to help one another.
Yeah. Cool. I think you pointed to this at the beginning of our conversation, but for you, it sounds like that the doorway into yoga was for the physical aspect. Is that right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I had injuries from sports. And it just became the next natural thing when I was in college of, okay, I'm not playing team sports anymore and I'm not lifting weights. I don't have a personal trainer that is for free anymore. So I've got to figure out what I'm going to do to live in my body and to try to live in it well. So yeah, it definitely started as just a practice for physical fitness. And then it just opened up all the other things. And I did my first teacher training in 2014. And I've been teaching with the studio I'm at since 2015.
Okay. So are you familiar with the 8 limbs of yoga?
I am. It's been a moment since I've done my traditional teacher training, but yes, I am.
Okay. No, that's fine. I was just curious if there was one particular, or maybe more than one, but limb that feels like it really resonates with you in the context of what's been most helpful for you in navigating your own life.
Yeah, I know that we talked about this previously, and I should have had that pulled up of what that's
Don't worry
how
about
our
it.
conversation was initiated. And I can't remember what particular limb I pointed to and said, hey, this is this. But I think it had to do with control. I think I mentioned that earlier, the one that talks about of letting go and letting things be and rendering, not having control of everything. That is the one that I point to that has really started me on that trajectory when it came to infertility and how to move forward and my grief around that.
Yeah. And no, this isn't a quiz. No problem about that. It's just wondering if there was one. Like sometimes I think people can adopt those as mantras and really guides through our lives. And I think you just use different words. You already do that and use that surrendering control. You just haven't named it as maybe the same way that I think of it.
Yeah.
But that practice of being able to surrender control is a tenet of a yoga practice. And that's one that you've already said several times has been hugely impactful for you, it sounds.
Absolutely. And it's not something that, again, I'm awful at it. I think I'm still awful at it at times, most of the time probably. Yeah. But yes, it was absolutely necessary I probably would have never been able to conceive, no matter the intervention, if I would have not let go of so much of the sadness and the stress that the sadness was causing me.
Yeah.
From infertility.
Yeah.
And from my miscarriages. It just kept building and building. And the grief turned into anger, and the anger turned into, that absolute, the not having the ability to control just was wreaking havoc on me, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, everything. And so that was, it was necessary for survival at that point to start to give into that and say, okay, you're not going to control everything. This is going to be what it is. And maybe I will be a mother someday. Maybe I won't be a mother someday, but we're going to have to find a new path to working with this grief. Otherwise I wasn't going to survive it.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you learn, or what did the practice of surrender look like for you?
At the time, expectation management was really important, and still looking to my gratitude practices. My body, my brain, my heart can do so many amazing things, and I have a support system, a great support system. And when I started trying to figure out what I needed to do to really sit with my grief or move through my grief or ride the waves of grief in a way that was not detrimental to my health anymore or my well-being, it looked like going to therapy. And it looked like a lot of sensual and feminine focused yoga practices, because at the time, infertility and not being able to conceive made me feel like I wasn't a whole woman. It made me feel like
Yeah.
a woman enough. And so I found some healers, some women who were just really, I used to think those practices were like overtly sexual and wild, and I enjoyed them, but I didn't really dive really deep into them. But I found that playfulness in them, from things to like topless yoga and just different women's retreats where we could like walk around naked at times or experience more work around the womb, have literally some different types of yoga or different types of massage around my womb. And just because I didn't like my womb at the time, it doesn't mean it's not there. And so just really finding those type of practices where I could focus and reconnect with my feminine, because I think that's what at the core was really missing for me at the time.
Yeah.
Just feeling like my body had betrayed me. Those were wildly helpful in getting on the path to just not my grief causing me to hate my body and trying to work through that.
Yeah. Were those practices initially outside of your comfort zone?
Wildly outside of my comfort zone. I'm a fairly reserved person. I feel like I've always had confidence in who I am, but never interested in as far as how I look. I've always been nitpicky about how I look and never overly confident in my body image. And so that probably made it 10 times worse when my body wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. Yeah, it was wildly outside my comfort zone. And there were times where I probably completely failed because I was going on the womb retreat for very different reasons than some of the other women were. And so I was like, does it feel safe that everybody's having this like great time and being wild and feeling into their feminine energy? And I'm here because I feel nothing. I am so deep in grief, and I've had two or three miscarriages at this time, and I feel nothing in my womb. I don't feel like these women. And even the theme, the practice, the purpose wasn't around grief. They were still willing to hold that space for me, and no matter what we were feeling or what came up. And yeah, it eventually became more comforting because the women that I worked with and went with on these retreats and started doing these practices with were open to the idea that healing doesn't just look like one thing, and grief doesn't look like one thing, and how it presents. And yeah, it took a lot of time, but eventually they became more normalized practices.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine you had to surrender a lot of what you thought, just a lot of the stories that you had and that we have, what you can and can't do, what is and is not normal or okay or whatever, or who I am. You have to let go of a lot of those stories in order to be able to do something, anything that's outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you see, when you're not on a women's retreat or in any of these very curated activities and situations, how did you maybe later then see the practice of surrender just show up in everyday life?
Yeah. So what that looked like for me, I was trying to conceive, but still work full time and still be a good friend and still be a good sister and be a good family member and be everything that I had signed up and wanted to be for everyone. And so it was allowing things not to, I don't want to say build up, but it was everything kept circling back to my stress and my grief. And it was just starting to put more mindful and presentness into the smallest practices, whether that's gardening, preparing a meal, having a conversation with someone, I was so overridden by my grief that I probably wasn't a very good friend or conversationalist at the time, because I'm looking at you, I'm nodding my head, I'm having a conversation with you, but there's this thing on my shoulder, there's this grief weighing me down. And I'm probably not really present in the conversation. And I'm probably thinking about, oh, but I'm sad today because I'm still not pregnant or still grieving my miscarriages. And so it really came to, hey, I want to be a good friend. I want to be a good partner. And it's not just for the other person in my life that I'm wanting to connect with. It's for myself. I need that connection. I did recognize that I need that connection to survive. So in order to do that, every time I start to feel that thing on my shoulder that was just the deep sadness of thinking about all those things, I had to almost physically close my eyes, back to the present, open back up, and just really focus on that present moment. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it's not an easy thing to do when your grief is that heavy. It's just not. It feels almost impossible thing to do. And it's not something that's done overnight. It took years of practice, because even after I did conceive and I did have my children, there was still grief there over all the process in the last 7 years. And why was that so hard? And my body, they came early and they had a lot of complications early. So this still wasn't easy. Why did this all have to be so hard? So there was still almost a decade's worth of anger and grief and resentment in there. And even now it's still a practice when I have someone who is talking about those things, whether it be miscarriage or something or another, I start to pull back to have those feelings of my own experiences and then continue to reset to let's focus on the present moment. Can find a time to sit with my feelings, but it's a really hard practice to do. And that's been pivotal to deciding what I want to anchor to. Do I want to anchor to my sadness? Sometimes I do, but I can't do that every day, 100%. Again, it goes back to survival, and I'm a little bit I'm a spiteful individual. I will survive these things, whether I was meant to or not. And it became a life point for me. Hey, if you want to get through this and live with it in a way that's where you can still be functional, you have to turn to these practices of presence. You can't just let this always loom and control everything. And again, decade or so-ish plus some years later, and it's still a regular practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that really thumbs up just the practice of yoga in itself as a practice of presence, continually bringing ourselves back to the present moment again and again. And there can be a lot of different ways to do that. A lot of different surrender is one practice to do that, but there are other practices to do that. But that presence is, in my experience of yoga, a big theme that runs throughout the entirety of it as a practice.
Yeah. It's hard, and I think it's unpopular too. I was thinking about talking about all those retreats I went on and all the somatic and womb-focused experiences. Those were such a privileged position to be in, where I could afford to do something like that. And I think in our culture, particularly in our country, we tend to be addicted to the feel-good of wellness sometimes. We're always healing. We're always doing this, right? The most boring and the most helpful and the most pivotal practice, like you said, presence during a conversation, making sure I am really connecting and relaying to living in the moment here. It's free and it's hard and it's boring and it's hard. But that's what changed how all of this lives in me. Not be expensive. It helped, but I felt like that was almost a little bit distracting me sometimes too.
Yeah.
It can be easy to choose things that distract us rather than really move forward.
Yeah, I like that. How does that presence then show up for you, maybe when it's just like you and your grief face to face? What does that look like as a practice?
It looks a lot like it did a decade ago, but it doesn't affect me the same as far as the impacts going forward, because I've been there before. I almost welcome it now. It's okay, because if I don't, I'm crying over the bug that's trying to get out of the room. But I'm like, oh my gosh, that poor. And I'm like, wait, am I really crying about the bug? Or is it just, I've been rushing around and doing all this and haven't really sat. So I really welcome, because of just my lifestyle. I work full time. Yoga is a secondary job for me. Mother of two, partner on the go, literally schedule time to allow myself to sit with sadness and check in with that part of my body.
Mm.
Because what that looked like for me is my shoulders tensing up. It looks like my thoracic spine being really tight. It looks like a pain. There's a really tight pain. I know I'm not listening to myself when I get a particular pain in my trapezius on my right arm, on my right side. And so that tells me, that signals to me like, hey, you haven't sat with yourself in a while. And if it's the grief that comes up because maybe I heard a friend talk about infertility, or I heard a friend talk about having her 10th baby so easy, it can come up either way. But because I have done that work to map my body and be comfortable going to those places that are a little taboo and uncomfortable, it doesn't drive me anymore. I drive it. And it doesn't have such a painful impact the way it used to, because it's welcomed. Not pushing it down. I'm not pretending. I'm not trying to push through it. I'm riding it, and I'm living in it, and I'm welcoming it, and I'm saying you're here and you're not going anywhere, and that's okay. And let's feel that and get back to living too.
Uh-huh. I love that. You've gotten to know it. So it's now, So although it can be uncomfortable and hard sometimes, it's not a stranger. And so it's not something that we need to like fear or run away from. I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it sounds like you have a really good awareness of how that shows up for you as an individual and what you need or don't need at those times.
Yeah. And that can change too. I think that's how it shows up for me right now in my 30s with 8-year-olds. And who knows what that'll look like in my 40s, 50s, and so on. And so that's where that presence and welcoming the changes as someone in there, I was going to say mid, but I guess it's more late 30s now, moving into 40 soon, because of the grief with what my body did and didn't do in my 20s, I feel will help me have more acceptance as I'm from maiden to mother to this crone stage when I start to move into my 40s and my 50s, where we all know our body stops doing the things we want it to do.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've set myself up to be well prepared for that by way of mapping and welcoming the grieving of those changes and what our expectations are of our body right now, that we should expect nothing because it can all change.
Yeah, it can. So how many miscarriages did you have?
I had 3.
3? Okay.
Yes, I had 2 natural miscarriages, and then I had a round of in vitro fertilization that failed and resulted in a miscarriage, and then I had a successful IVF.
Okay. And how far along were the 2 miscarriages, the first 2 that you had?
All of my miscarriages were before 14 weeks. They were fairly early, and that was something that I think I struggled with sharing my pregnancy. After my first miscarriage, I didn't want to share the next time that I was pregnant because I wasn't sure how it would go. And then when I miscarried again, I think I downplayed it. Everyone's got different opinions on conception and this and that and the other, but it was a loss to me. Never felt a baby kicking in my womb, but I was pregnant and I experienced the loss. And I think I downplayed it at first to people in my circle because I think men, if they don't experience pregnancy, they don't understand fully how you start feeling different pretty early on, and good or bad or indifferent. And I think my husband didn't quite understand the impacts of miscarrying because, it's early, it's okay. It's not like you were 26 weeks. It's not like you had to have a procedure. Like, there are much worse situations and people that have pregnancy loss much later on, which is true, but that doesn't mean that my grief was invalid. But I really downplayed it because I thought it's not that bad. And that was, really downplaying the sadness that it brought me because I felt like I wasn't allowed to.
Yeah. Do you feel like in hindsight, maybe that was an attempt to try to control?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so used to being not only very controlling, but also the helper. And so I usually look to someone else's and look, their situation is much worse. So I'm not allowed to feel sad. Yeah. She lost a baby at 30 weeks. That's devastating. She had a stillborn. She went through a whole entire 9-month pregnancy and had a stillborn. That is devastating. What I'm experiencing is not devastating. And so I really tried to trick my brain and my body saying, hey, you're not allowed to be sad. There are people who have it much worse. So buck up and shut up. And that was the absolute wrong approach.
Yeah.
That did not go well at all. But that's what I tried to do through every single miscarriage.
Yeah. That's minimizing our grief and our experience and our people. Do you think of your miscarriages as people who you've lost?
Absolutely. I think I still track time, which is funny because I don't think I've really ever thought about that out loud, but I think I still track time. And my boys who are here Earthside, they're 8. I would have had a potential 10-year-old, a potential 11-year-old, a potential 9-year-old. But then maybe I wouldn't have had my 8-year-olds that I do have here Earthside. But I do track, what would have and could have, and what that loss kind of looks like when I see folks with, because even though I have twins, I had one pregnancy. And so I find myself looking and being the mom that has 4 kids running around and she's pregnant again too.
Yeah.
And have that visualization of, oh, that's what I thought would happen for me. And it didn't happen and that's okay. But yeah, I do absolutely visualize my pregnancies as, how many kids have I had today?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel any connection to them?
I definitely feel I know the miscarriage dates and I keep those close to my heart. And I definitely feel like in my practices where I connect with my womb and continue to spend that time with having gratitude for my body, I don't know if I physically feel like I connect with them spiritually as much as I feel like I find myself like thanking them for because I do get to experience motherhood. And so I do feel like on specific anniversaries of miscarriages or just when I think back to a certain period of time, and I'm thanking somebody, and it's not the universe and it's not God. And so maybe it is them that when I see my children that I do have here Earthside running around and playing and arguing and fighting and all the things that kids do, thinking the overall experience, maybe thanking them personally, maybe thanking my womb, maybe thanking all of it, because I do feel like that sadness, I can look at my kids at any given moment and just break down and cry. Should be doing the most like obnoxious thing, painting on my walls or fighting with each other or something. And I'm like, oh my God. And I just lose it because that sadness has given me such perspective of these kids could be punching holes through my walls right now. And I'd be like, I love you so much. Be absolutely running amok. And I think I see all my babies in those two and try to find some divinity in it all. But
Have you experienced other deaths in your life?
Yes, but I would say that those are, I don't want to say typical, but my family my family's from the Eastern Kentucky region. And one of the reasons I was interested in doing the death midwifery work is because my family has always done death a little differently than what I felt people around me where I live now and stuff did. And so death was really normalized at a young age for me. They didn't keep kids away from funeral homes. They were very plain speaking about what death was physically. This is your body not working anymore, and here's what we do. And we had more traditional wakes and practices and some things that you've probably learned about in the death midwife training that we did together that just aren't typical practices anymore. One thing is called staying up with the dead. And what it is when a loved one in our family passes away, there is that person who is left, their body's not left alone from the time that they have passed to the time that we bury them in the family cemetery. And that looks like a lot of different things. When we have a service, a wake, a funeral, it's a 24-hour thing. There's food, there's drinking, and then it's the family members that carry the body to the family gravesite. And there's very little outside support. Like we have these businesses that tend to do all the things for us now. My family left business out of it and they handled everything themselves. So from a very young age, I was introduced to loss as being just a very natural part of life, a universal experience. And I have a very close-knit family. And so, yeah, I've lost my papa was definitely a father figure. I grew up next door to him, very close to him, and I lost him. Well, I will tell you this fun fact. My papa's birth date, no, my papa's death date was the same day that I went into labor with my twins.
Mm.
And I always think about that. And I had a really frenzy of a birth because my water broke super early. And I definitely, in the midst of being in a haze and figuring out what they were going to do to try to keep the twins in longer or try to bring them out and go through a C-section, I definitely felt my papa's presence there. And that was probably the biggest loss in my life from a family perspective. My parents are both still living, but yeah, I was my papa's girl growing up, and he was definitely the first significant family death in my life. But I think again, because of how my family was really comfortable in a more traditional a more natural way of doing burial and death, it impacted me for sure, but not in a way that was so negative and so changing the trajectory for negativity.
Yeah. How do you think growing up with that perspective and experience, just how did that shape your understanding and beliefs about death?
It made me oddly comfortable, probably a little bit of a weirdo in this sense. It's not like I was overly morbid or wanted to talk about it often or more so than the average person growing up, but it definitely made me more curious into why. And then when I started to get into these practices of yoga and working with folks who were experiencing grief through death or the grief of a marriage loss or the grief of a job loss, all the ways that grief shows up, it really became transparent that, having business and industry take over and take away some of those practices that we used to do in the home as families and communities really desensitizes us. And that's how grief and death became so taboo, because of industry and businesses taking over that practice that we don't feel as a whole, as a community, comfortable doing anymore ourselves. And so I think it set me up and Yellow Springs is the perfect place for me to be. It's a little hippie town. And so everybody's really open to learning about green burial and open to working with midwives and supporting local business. We do have a local funeral director who I love dearly and I work with. And so I'm not against the funeral industry by any means, but I'm definitely for folks knowing what options exist out there, because just knowing, again, it goes back to, I'm a little bit of a control freak. It makes me feel really good knowing that I've got plans in place when it's my time, whether that's tomorrow or 50 years from now, so that nobody has to question or rush or worry about what they need to do to make my arrangements. Everything's said and done. And that brings me peace personally, because I was comfortable enough to talk about those subjects, to write down those subjects, to say, hey, do I want a green burial? Do I want to be cremated? Do I care either way? I probably should just write something down so that nobody questions it or feels like they're not making the right choice. And I don't want that to be stressful for anybody who is taking care of those things for me. And so it just, set me up to be more at peace and more practical and be a really steady person when it comes to my circle of women who have been faced with unimaginable grief and loss, the women that outside of my family that have become my sisters and my friends, to really be a solid weight of, when people naturally want to panic or they're drowning in the grief or their sadness or they don't know what to do next, I'm like, ooh, I can help here. And I can do it with a clearer and calmer head, because it's been very normalized to me from such a young age.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, but it's so interesting. Like, if the more normalized death was for you, the more normalized then grief was. And everything that comes with that has it sounds like just been, while difficult sometimes, it's been normal. So never anything that you've had to fear or hide from.
Yeah. It's definitely it felt natural.
Yeah.
To me, to be the person that kind of, when there's a fire, people run away out of a building. I'm the one like, okay, maybe I should go in that building. And I'm okay if I'm the one that goes in that building, because I have the skills and the demeanor to go into that building and potentially do some good. And so
Yeah.
that's where I
You know what it looks like.
root back into like, where can I do good and where can I help?
Yeah.
And if all these experiences that we've talked about culminate in that I have the ability to be a calm, helpful person in a time of someone else's grief and distress, then good.
Yeah.
I'm good with that being what I'm here for.
Yeah. So in your work as a grief midwife, do you refer to yourself or?
Yeah. I use
Death, yeah.
midwife,
Okay. Do you sit with people as they're dying?
Yeah. Usually in that regard, it's someone who doesn't have a close circle. Like typically it looks different for every client. Some clients do have a huge support circle. Some have a support circle, but they don't want them to be there at the time of their death, or some of them aren't comfortable with that situation. And so it just varies. It never looks the same with any two people. But yes, there have been times where I've had clients who, for a myriad of reasons, their circle is not there and I become their circle. And it's definitely the most intense experience as a death midwife to be the only one in the room, to not have a larger circle of supports, but still very meaningful and impactful. And as a death midwife, I work with medical providers. I'm not a medical provider, so usually I'm working with a hospice nurse at minimum. And yeah, so I have sat with people whom I'm not related to and who I'm related to at their time of death.
Okay. Are there other aspects of the work that you do that's maybe not sitting with people at the time of death?
A lot of what I do now is the kind of education on alternatives, green burial arts alternatives, or just helping people. I call it planning for peace. I think, what we see a lot, Yellow Springs has various degrees of folks at different spectrums of income and ability here. And we see a lot of GoFundMes every day for funeral expenses and things like that. And so I think that before I offer, like, yes, I can be your death midwife and be with you at death. But more importantly, like my regular education in the community is education around planning for peace, making all those arrangements as early as we can. And then also letting people know that there all are alternatives than the standard burial practices. And maybe learning about those things and just having those conversations. I'm not pushing my agenda or opinions either way. If someone wants to go the most standard route and pay a bunch of money, and I've more power to you. I want to support you in your decision making. But no matter what the topic is we're talking about, the focus is just to talk about death and grief, right? To get more familiar with the conversations and it be less taboo. And because I ran some workshops around that, like our senior center in town has regular death cafes and they're on their own.
Wow.
They don't, sometimes I pop in and I show up, but most of the time I don't anymore. And they just facilitate their own conversations around as they're all very aware they're probably approaching toward the end of their life. And yeah, whether it's the grief and yoga practice or the education on why we should plan or the different burial alternatives, it's all about just making those topics less taboo and so that everyone can sit with all those feelings about their own mortality or their experience with death for a loved one. Just sit with those in different.
Yeah. That's so cool. It sounds like you're really like in a lot of different ways sparking these conversations and these considerations in people that maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise. That's great. Do you have any of your own personal beliefs around death and what happens when we die?
I do and I don't. I think my overarching beliefs is I'm not going to know. I can have an idea, but no, I think it's beautiful. And I think all religions, I think everybody's onto the right path, even though some of them say different things. So I don't subscribe to a particular religion and what they say happens at death. I've got a couple books on my shelf right now, the Tibetan Book for the Dead, and I'm reading some really old material about what different monks and things thought about death and dying a long time ago. But it hasn't changed my opinion a whole lot, which is I don't think I'm going to get to know. And so I try to really focus on that obscuredness and being okay with that kind of obscurity and that unabsolution. For me personally, I don't need that absolution or that promise of an afterlife. And the folks that do, again, I had no concern either way. I love that, to each their own. I'm very much for that. But it does, I am more interested in the physical body. And I'm more interested in studying what will happen to my body physically after I die. I want to have a natural burial so I can be part of the dirt, be part of the worms, be part of regeneration. And so for my physical body, I focus on that aspect. For my spiritual body and my soul, I am okay with not knowing. So I don't really subscribe to anything other than I better just really enjoy it here and now. I feel like I do know. And again, back to that presence of, if I woke up 90 years old tomorrow, but I was told, hey, you're going back to being 37 and your kids are 8 years old and you've got a baseball game tonight. Like, how much the lens that I would then look through that would be so different than probably how I'm looking at it today. Today, I'm like, okay, stressed. I got to get to this. The weather's bad. Are we even going to have the game? And so I try to, when I'm asked a question like that too, I think heaven is right here. I think hell is right here. It's all right here, right now for me personally. And so that's what I move from, is being okay with not knowing.
That's beautiful. It's all right here, right now. I love that. And it circles right back to the surrender you were talking about earlier. And with that, the presence.
That I feel like I want to control. That's a pretty big thing to not care about. I might want to, but I don't find a lot of personal fulfillment in seeking that, because I find it so interesting that there are so many views and perspectives, whether it be through religion or psychology or some sort of spiritual practice. I'm like, yes, all of it. I hope it happens for all of us in whatever way you want it to. So maybe I'm just, of all the things that I tend to be cynical about, I'm wildly pessimistic that everybody's going to just get what they want and what they subscribe to. And I don't spend a lot of time, focusing on it.
We can't do it all.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else under the very broad umbrella of yoga, grief, that feels like we haven't talked about yet, but feels important to name?
I'm going to take a strategic pause before I start acting on that. And I think we covered a lot. You asked me a lot of really great questions. I feel like I talked too much to talk. I'm not comfortable talking a whole lot usually. I think having a physical practice of any kind, whether it's yoga, whether it's running, whether it's lifting weights, whether it's tennis, anything, it's, I think, empirical for living well and being prepared for anything that comes at you in life. Grief being one of those things that I don't think any of us are going to be able to escape. Having a practice that puts us in touch with our body physically will absolutely benefit anything we experience emotionally, in particular with grief. And I think it's key for surviving the things that happen to us that cause us grief. And so, I'm always interested in those types of practices and learning more about the somatics of how grief does show up in the body. And I wish there were more studies about that and more books on that and more connection to both of those things. And so I look forward to the work you do and I'm hoping that kind of just brings forward more and more conversations, because it is so universal. And my story and my stories and all the stories that I've heard from other people, they're very they're unique, but they're universal all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I want to keep talking about it, and I want to keep learning and sharing.
Yeah. We're doing very similar work, just in different, it looks a little bit different, the logistics of it, but that bringing the awareness to our bodies and and in doing that, creating space for whatever happens to be there at that time. Oftentimes it does come with emotions that are tied to experiences, but just creating that space for that to open up through, not always, but through the doorway of our bodies.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm really inspired by you. It feels like you're planting a lot of seeds all over the place.
That's what I'm here to do.
And there's little sprouts all over the place, and it's really cool and it's inspiring because it feels really like widespread.
Yeah, I think there's, again, like the focus on accessibility is really important to me. So in all this and all we talk about, because this is such a universal experience, I want it to be talked about more, and I want more seeds to be planted so that it can be more accessible to everyone to feel like these aren't taboo topics and this isn't for privileged people to experience, that we can change cultures and communities and really get to a place where all of this is integrated in normal living. And so, yeah, the more seeds sown, the better for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that work. And thank you for being willing to talk about it. I feel like I need to thank your parents for normalizing that from day one for you. But thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being here with me, Laura Walton, and my incredible guest on Grief on Purpose. Your presence is a gift, and I'm so grateful you're walking this path with us. For more connection and resources, you'll find everything you need in the show description. To my guests, thank you for sharing your person with us today. It is truly an honor to know your story. I'm your host, Laura Walton. Until next time, be kind to yourself and remember you're not alone in your grief. We are here on purpose.